it's interesting when I think about my own training and my own kind of personal involvement and my understanding of environmental issues. I think it would have started out when I was an undergraduate and moving into graduate school as fairly narrowly framed, thinking about kind of natural resource use and the scientific understanding of natural resource use and profligacy, if you want to think of it that way. And then I went through a period in my own understanding of things in which I began to acknowledge and recognize that that sort of understanding alone was simply not going to suffice to convince people that were in positions of decision-making authority regarding land management, that the scientific background alone was not necessarily going to move them to make the sorts of decisions that I would have hoped. So I was in a position as a kind of a young scientist doing field work in which I felt that at that point I needed to expand my own understanding of their business. That is, what is it that they have to account for in their land management decisions, both philosophically as well as pragmatically. So I began studying the policy-making part. So then the part around kind of human well-being and the conflicts between human well-being and maybe the scientific perspectives that I thought I understood so clearly started to get more complicated. And then, now coming more recently, it's become clear, for example, we could look at a case study like the implementation of the Endangered Species Act, where much of the policy level obstinacy against implementing that act has really boiled down to economic decision making. And so then we get now the consideration around how do you fund things? Can we do it in such a way that at least we break even? And then finally, the last piece, and again, represents a historical progression not only for me personally, but I think in terms of popular opinion as well as real practice. The public has become increasingly involved in demonstrating that there is a willingness to pay for services that, for example, intact biological communities provide to human beings. And then it becomes an important consideration to begin thinking about how it is that we make these policy decisions plausibly economically feasible. And we engage that part of people's willingness to act, willingness to pay, as part of the story. So when you put all of those perspectives together, it's encapsulated in this triple bottom line buzz phrase, as I would call it, in which it's not sufficient to engage the necessary support for a policy to go forward to simply say, okay, we can be natural resource conservation oriented, or in some senses, in the vernacular, I'm a bleeding heart for name the species, particular whale. That's not going to be sufficient. And the incorporation of economically sound policy making makes it all the more palatable, especially for people who otherwise might be against this sort of perspective that it does matter how we treat our natural resources and non-human species. So if they can't be convinced on the basis of, say, a scientific argument alone, they may at least be willing to listen if it can be shown that it's also economically sound. And I think that that's a marriage of perspectives that is not only sensible, but at this point, it's a requirement. It has become a requirement. And so rather than fighting that on moral grounds or something, it's been embraced. And then it's been turned to good use for better thinking, which is the part that I find welcome. Sustainability efforts require interdisciplinary interdisciplinary approaches, in order for them to actually land and be practically manageable and to gain some traction even with the public, they have to be problem-solving approaches that are going to engage various disciplinary backgrounds. So I think that's unique because we have a tradition well established here at Truman already of fostering interdisciplinary work amongst our undergraduates, and we have faculty that have practice in doing that, and we have faculty that are capable of taking that approach in their own work. So I see that as a natural and valuable extension of the culture here at this university, which is why I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do a good job of presenting those interdisciplinary approaches and the reasons for that approach being relevant in the courses that we're offering for the certificate. I know for me, that's been the joy and the challenge of trying to put my own course together or consolidate my own thinking about these things, is that I'm drawing from many, many different perspectives simultaneously, and I really like doing that. There's this gigantic umbrella of considerations in the corporate world that get wrapped up under this sense of sustainability. That's the pretext to my answer. That in the corporate world, this notion, the triple bottom line notion, has been embraced and appropriated because people recognize that workers have desires about how the companies they work for ought to be operating internally, as well as what the face of the company ought to look like to the outside world. And so for people that might gain these sorts of perspectives by earning a certificate in sustainability, they might be able to carry that perspective into a business, regardless of how large or small it is, and to make a reasonable claim that this is actually good for their business, because many people do care about the environment. They'd like to see the place that from which they earn their livelihood actually, so to speak, doing the right thing in that regard. But they also know that they have a responsibility to work for the company, and the company may have shareholders, or certainly there's a profit motive there that is worth acknowledging. And in many cases, good decision making that would, for example, be more resource use effective will not only make the company potentially more profitable, but could also be doing the right things in terms of reducing natural resource waste. So when people begin to understand that those are not mutually exclusive demands to be thinking about, and people that might have the training from this certificate start to think creatively about how they could achieve these ends simultaneously with new sorts of innovative policies, say, within their company, I think they stand to earn some respect from their colleagues.